Hi, Haunted Family, back with another episode. As a child, I got to visit Texas. And if we have any listeners from Texas, I was blown away by your state. It's gorgeous. And there's so much to do, so much to see, and so many amazing ghost stories. It's definitely a place I would like to get back to at some point in time. So this episode is all ghost stories that have some link to the state of Texas. As always, if you like the story, please subscribe, like the episode, share this channel with your friends. When we finally reach 1,000 subscribers, we'll be doing a really nice gift package giveaway to a lucky listener. Sit back and enjoy the show. When we first moved to San Angelo, Texas, we were leasing a home. I found myself unemployed as I had left my job in Houston to go with my husband, who was transferred. At the time, we had 2 teenage sons, still at home. My mother was in a nursing home, so that left me all alone during the day. Every day around noon, if I was standing at the kitchen sink, I would see a man in a dark suit walk up the walk to the front door. Being alone, I was always hesitant to go see who it was. But I would go to the door anyway. There was never anyone there. The same thing would also happen sometime between 4:30 and 5 p.m. I said nothing about this to anyone else in the house, as I didn't want my husband to think I was losing it. Then one day I heard my 17-year-old son talking to his friend. He told him that there was this man in a dark suit whom he would see walk up to the front door, but whenever he would go to the door to see who it was, there would be no one there. I was quite relieved to know that I wasn't crazy. Then we began hearing someone put a key in the front door lock. The door would never open, and neither did the storm door. The doorbell would ring, but there would never be anyone there. My youngest son insisted on moving his bed to the other side of his room. Something about shadows. Things would disappear and reappear in strange places. One evening, as I sat alone, the dog's fur stood on end and began to growl at the entrance hall. I looked, and there was this smoky-looking stuff that came together and formed an elongated oval shape, and then just disappeared. We bought a house on the other side of the city. It felt warm and quite homey. Nothing strange happened there until we repainted the guest room. I went in there to vacuum the following day and noticed 2 long rows of wet spots on one wall. I panicked, thinking that we have a water pipe leaking. I touched one, and it felt cold but not wet. I pressed a tissue to the wall, and it absorbed no moisture. We finally got the spots covered, but it took 2 coats of bleed check and a lot more paint to do it. It would still get this cold feeling. It felt like I was being watched. The cat would bat at things in the air that were not visible. The guest room wall still remained a mystery. There was one spot on it that felt electrically charged, but it really wasn't. Things would disappear and reappear in strange places. For instance, once my husband was packing to go to a seminar. He was taking new toiletries out of the wrapper and packing them. He left the wrappings on the bed. I was there with him. He took some cash out of his pocket and handed it to me. I told him to put it in my purse, which was on the dresser. I watched him do it. Then I gathered up the wrappers, took them to our bathroom, and threw them in the wastebasket. When I went to drop the paper in the wastebasket, the money was in the trash, all crumpled up. The doorbell would ring, and no one would be there. One day a blue car came out of our driveway. The doorbell rang. The dog barked and ran to the door. I followed. Through the glass door, I could see a plaid shirt on a man. I opened the door, and there was no one there. There was no car there either. My daughter-in-law told me that, as she was about to put her arm around me in the kitchen, something pushed her away, something that felt cold, and my other daughter-in-law said flatly that she would not be staying in the guest room ever again. Didn't want to discuss it. The stove would be turned on mysteriously, almost causing fires. The list goes on and on. I'm almost glad we moved to Oklahoma just to get out of that house. All was fine for the first couple months after we moved to Oklahoma, but now it's starting here. Things disappearing. They haven't even started reappearing yet. Cats seeing something that wasn't there. I feel like I'm being watched again. Even getting the feeling that I'm being blanketed by something cold as ice. In Texas, at one point, we set a tape recorder up. For the most part, there was nothing, except in the middle of one tape, there was this moan. Really quite eerie. Oh, I almost forgot to add. Sometimes in the Texas house, my husband and I would think we heard the other one calling for each other, but neither of us had actually spoken. And Sometimes a man's form would appear outside the shower while I was taking a shower. There were times when I know I saw my husband walk into the room or come down the hallway, but he wasn't there. You know, there are times when I feel like this was all a dream, but it's not. It really happens. This story was originally told to me by my grandmother, of an incident that happened when she was about 13 years old. My grandmother is now in her 80s, and has got to be the sweetest, kindest, most precious old Christian woman that you could ever hope to meet. My grandmother lived on a small piece of farmland in East Texas, with her mother, father, and younger siblings. At the far end of their land, there remained the ruins of an old shack. The old shack was never entered or explored due to the dangerous, dilapidated conditions. The old shack never really crossed anyone's mind. It was a normal day-to-day sight as they passed it, many times family members daily during the course of their chores. One day, while heading up the pass towards the old shack to tend to her chores, my grandmother stopped nearby when she believed she saw several figures emerging from the old shack. She thought to herself, no one should be on our land without permission, not to mention in the old shack. They could be injured. She got closer to get a better look, and she did indeed see figures emerging from the old shack. Each figure was clear down to their last detail of clothing. Each wore dirty coveralls, long-sleeved shirts, and each carried a shovel in their hands, as well as an old cotton burlap-type bag. This in itself might not be so odd, but each figure that she saw had no visible head. One by one she watched as each figure dug a small hole in the earth, and in the hole they each dropped the sack they carried, then suddenly disappeared. I asked my grandmother if she was frightened by what she saw. She has always said that she never felt any fear at all, that what she felt was that she was meant to see this. She told her parents what she saw that day. Knowing that she was not the type of child to make up such crazy stories, they believed her and left it at that. The ways the Lord works is not always understood. My grandmother continued to live on the farm for a short time later, and never experienced any further strange experiences. Over the years, my grandmother told the story to friends and family and several other people. I have gone back to the old site where she'd seen the ghost, thinking perhaps the ghost had buried money, or something of importance. Each visitor to the area had always felt cold and uneasy, and was spooked away before ever digging around. I asked my grandmother if she ever tried to go back to dig around, as I felt, and she has felt too, that since the ghost let them see them, that they would let her come back and perhaps see what they buried, but she never went back. Many years have passed since that time, and now she is unsure of the exact spot of her ghost sighting. I guess she, and we, will never know exactly what was buried, or what purpose it was that she saw what she saw. I'm a 71-year-old, and I've lived in northwestern Pennsylvania for the last 20 years. I am, however, a fifth-generation Texan, and this story is about the Alamo. When I was approximately 7 years old, I accompanied my family on a visit to San Antonio. We, of course, went to visit the Alamo. My mother was a former school teacher and a Texas history buff, so we were well versed in Texas history and understood completely what the Alamo represented. 64 years ago was a simpler time. We had no television to educate us on the looks and sounds of historical events. Also, I'm sure, as 7, the only movie I'd seen was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I'm pointing this out as proof that I had not had any preconceived ideas of the appearance or sounds of the Battle of the Alamo. As we were well-behaved children, my parents thought nothing of letting us wander off after arriving at the Alamo, to look around in display cases, explore for ourselves. I was alone without my parents or my sisters. I came to the entrance of the chapel in the Alamo. To my eyes, it was a state of abandonment, with high stone walls and longish narrow windows without glass up towards the ceiling, before it vaulted into the ceiling began. The floor was sand from debris from several of the stones from the walls here and there. There were no plaques or display cases. I did not step into the chapel. I only stood at the entrance and watched as the smoke and dust billowed into the high windows, heard cannon and gunfire, and faintly smelled gunpowder, and another smell that I didn't quite recognize. Perhaps it was blood? I could also hear continuous shouting and occasional screaming of men from beyond the walls of the empty chapel. It was like standing at the edge of a movie, or perhaps like using one of those virtual reality devices. I stood there, entranced for several minutes, and then, like any other 7-year-old, wandered away to continue my tour. I did not mention this to my family at the time. It's a wondrous event to me now, but at the time, it never occurred to me that everyone couldn't see the chapel of yesteryear or hear the battle raging. Now I feel very honored to have witnessed this haunting. Years later, I wondered what it would have happened if I'd stepped into the sand floor of the chapel. Would I have came into a small room where Jim Bowie lay dying? Would a door have opened into a terrible battle? Or would the whole thing have disappeared to become a sterile chapel of 100 years later with proper plaques and display cases of a historic site? I feel almost certain that this is what is known as a residual haunting, with the sights, sounds, and impressions upon a landscape. I would not like to think that those poor souls are still fighting that battle that they know is going to end in their death.